Hey everybody, this is just a quick overview of PEAL paragraph formatting. I'm not a huge acronym fan, but they can be useful for creating mental checklists, and that's exactly what PEAL is for me. It just helps me, it's kind of automatic for me to use evidence and analyze and things like that at this point in my life. But it's a good way to double check to make sure I have the most persuasive, intelligent paragraph possible. So as a really quick overview, you make a point, the overall purpose of the communication. You use a piece of evidence or 3 pieces of evidence or 10 pieces of evidence to prove that your point is true. And then with analysis, you break down how that evidence supports the point. And then finally, you transition or conclude by returning to the original idea. Okay, so why do we have to follow this format and this order? I hate recipes in my writing. I just want to write. Well, you don't. You can write the paragraph naturally and then look back and say, hey, did I make a point? Did I use some evidence? Did I logically explain how the evidence makes that point? Did I transition? So it's kind of a natural flow, and you'll use it in lots of situations, both in jobs or in persuading people in your personal life. So here's the basic overview. P is the point. It can be called a topic sentence, a stance, your answer. If it's coming from a prompt or question, like should we have gun control, or should I get a puppy, or analyze why this passage supports the idea that Shakespeare was writing a tragedy. There are all kinds of different prompts, but make sure that you address it. And stay on topic. And this is the simplest part. This is the one sentence answer to the question. But then that's never enough, because you want your audience to know how your brain arrived at that P, that conclusion, that point. So your evidence should be drawn from credible sources or from the text you're being asked to analyze. It might be from original research. Maybe it's your own conclusion after looking at a body of data or observing the world. You shouldn't misquote your source or take it out of context, because that's kind of dishonest. Usually you need an in-text citation, so that can be as simple as, according to the biographer of Shakespeare, Richard Dreyfuss, or according to my observations of the parking lot, or wherever it is, you need to kind of explain where that information came from. It might require more than one piece of evidence. Sometimes your prompt or your question will ask you to use 3 sources, 3 documents, 3 primary sources, 3 articles. So if you're not required to do research and you're not drawing directly on a source, it could be an example. So I see that the parking lot is very crowded at this time of day. Perhaps it would be good if we directed cars to park both in the north lot and the south lot. So it can be really, really, really simple. Or an example of why a puppy would make me more responsible is that I will have to clean up its poop. That's another example. Okay, so it's not always going to come from page 13 in the first paragraph, the author says. It can be an example from life. It just depends what the prompt is asking. So importantly, you should explain how that piece of evidence proves your point. It might require lots of development, or maybe it just is pointing out self-evident connections. But either way, it should rely on logic. Don't just throw the evidence out there and then hope that your audience makes the leap. So after your analysis, you either conclude or transition by linking back to the prompt or the initial topic in some way. So let's look at some examples. You're going to state your point. First of all, removing wild animals from their natural habitats is incredibly cruel. That's this person's stance. Whether you agree with it or not, that's the stance there in red. When kept captive, these beautiful creatures become bored and lonely, often leading to a condition called zoochosis. Animals suffering from zoochosis begin performing anxious, repetitive acts, such as, that's one of the keys that you know it's evidence, such as rocking back and forth, swaying, grooming themselves excessively, and vomiting. It's really sad. Here's the analysis. Conditions such as these clearly demonstrate, there's a key word for when something is analyzing, that wild animals belong in the wilderness, not in restrictive prison-like enclosures. Link back to the topic or question. Animals must be freed from zoos now so that this terrible suffering and mental torture ends for good. So clearly the prompt or the topic is, should we abolish zoos? And there is a rebuttal to this in the introduction to The Life of Pi. It's fascinating. So if you're like, oh no, zoos, go read that. Life of Pi is a fun book. Okay. Here's another example. See if you can figure out why each one of these colors is what it is. Okay, so that red sentence is very general, explains why why the Pacific Ring of Fire is so intense. It's because there are some specific types of tectonic plate boundaries. One of them, this is an example. So one example is another key word that you're using a piece of evidence or an example. So the South American plate is subducting beneath the Andes Mountains. And then that green part explains that the Pacific plate is melting as it falls under the mountains itself. And then magma wells up there. And magma is destructive. Woo, okay. So pretty straightforward, right? But we see this in science all the time. PEAL is critical in science. I'm going to show you another example from a very prominent scientist. This is an excerpt from his essay on the theory of relativity. It's very advanced to read, but I've broken it down for you. So first of all, his point has to do with conventional geometry. It's red right there. You can read it for yourself. Then he gives an example. If a cloud is hovering over Times Square, we can determine its position relative to the surface of the Earth by putting a pole in the ground that rises up into the cloud, and then the length of the pole measured with the standard measuring rod combined with the specification of the position from the foot of the pole supplies us with a complete place specification. So it's really easy, some basic trigonometry there. Actually, this darker blue should be right there. Oh well, anyway. And then finally he's got a link here. He says, hey, my illustration shows you that, as I said in the first place, this is our usual way of finding position. It's relative to something else, okay? So this one's super hard. Don't worry about understanding it. I just want to show you that even Albert Einstein is using this PEAL formatting. It's just not always obvious, okay? So which one of these is PEAL and why? Explain a way that the ancient Greeks influenced the modern world, or that ancient Greece influenced the modern world. So here's our first paragraph. Greek mythology has had a significant influence on English literature. Ooh, look, there's a claim, so that's the point. For example, keyword, Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies include many references to myths and character archetypes similar to the Greek pantheon. These appearances are far from coincidence. They indicate that Shakespeare was familiar with and valued classical Greek mythology. So PEAL happened in 3 sentences. They aren't always one sentence per thing. Okay, that's nice. Okay. Greek mythology has had a significant influence on English literature. Writers like use myths and find some also nice, but examples here tragedies have character archetypes work. We have some evidence. Hopefully another example all over the place. See some links and some advertisements. Okay, can be split into that thought organized around. So here, when you finish, develop your idea line for how responsive at the development. Most important evidence to help you for all points. Helps you out. Going to be difficult is I communicate because will help you try to really offend. Always to check in or a lot.